Democrats appear to have quite a primary shaping up in the 1st Congressional District. One of the contenders joins us this morning on Close Up. Carly Bariant, a select woman from Hampton. Ms. Bariant, thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Adam.
So first off, just tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're running for Congress.
Absolutely. So this is a moment unlike any other in our nation's history. And like a lot of people, I am really worried about the big things like, are we going to get dragged into another war in the Middle East? And why are we not vaccinating our children anymore? And is the New Hampshire voucher program going to be nationalized by the Trump administration? I'm also upset about the fact that we still don't have single-payer health care, that we don't have paid parental leave, and that a lot of people in our communities are having a hard time making ends meet. And I'm a mom. I'm married to a public school teacher. I'm an elected official in Hampton. I'm a historian and I'm an organizer. And all of those jobs have taught me that we need people who listen, who show up with integrity, and who help others do the same. They've also taught me that you don't get what you don't fight for, and this is a moment that calls for people to step up and to fight for our democracy and for our communities and for our neighbors.
CD1 is obviously very familiar with Congressman Pappas. They've elected him 4 times in a row. How would you be different? It sounds like you'd be a bit more progressive there in D.C.
I think that Chris Pappas has laid a really important groundwork for us. And the ways that I would be different is I would show up in a different way for our communities because I'm a different person. You know, I come from a teaching background, and I think like Chris Pappas, I would try to work across the aisle like I do in Hampton in order to achieve material gains for the people in our communities. I'm also a teacher, and so one of the things that I think I do really well is help people understand how the policies in Washington and the policies in Concord affect all of us in New Hampshire.
How are you going to stand out in this 1st District Democratic primary? Obviously, it's going to be a struggle to match either Stephanie Shaheen or Maura Sullivan in fundraising. And of course, one of those people has the last name Shaheen. So what do you do to break through?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I think really makes me stand out is that I'm the only person running who's currently elected in the state of New Hampshire. And I'm also the only one who's unseated a longtime Republican. And not only have I unseated a Republican, I work closely with Republicans every day in Hampton to make things better for the people in our community. And so I think that those 2 things immediately make me stand out, and I think that they'll help set me apart.
You know, something that does stand out to me, I was looking around on social media to try and find stuff from you. I may just be old and couldn't find it, but nothing on Twitter, Blue Sky, X, Facebook. Is this, so no social media for you right now?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Adam. So I don't have social media. I haven't used social media in a long time, and I'm not planning to start using social media right now. I think that the owners of these social media companies, we saw them sitting in the front row of Trump's inauguration. We saw Elon Musk take an axe to our federal government and our amazing programs and institutions and the people who have dedicated their lives to them. And I am not going to spend a single penny advertising on those websites or use forums that have been created to divide us and to destroy our democracy to have the conversations with people in this community. I think that people in this district don't want any more monologues from politicians. They want dialogue. They want people who show up in real life and ask them about what matters and what we can do to make things better.
A principled stand there, but a big trade-off. There might be a lot of voters you can't reach because of that.
I'm confident that the people will find me and that I will find them.
One of the top issues you articulated at your campaign launch, you just mentioned it now, was the high cost of childcare. What is your plan to address that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam, because I think this is a real concern for so many people in the district, including me. When I first had my daughter, I had no idea that it was going to cost me $20,000 a year to get her to childcare so that I could go back to work. I mean, in New Hampshire, most people pay upwards of $20,000 for daycare for their kids. And to put that in perspective, that is more than it costs to send your kid to UNH for the year. The fact that we have to pay more for for education before our kids hit kindergarten than it does to send them to college for 4 years is absolutely obscene. And I think it's something that really has a drag on our economy, right? WMUR put out a great statement a couple months ago that helped people appreciate that there's $177 million that are missing from our economy because of parents who can't find childcare. And because of that, that's money that's missing from our businesses, it's money that's missing from our economy, and it's money that could be better spent elsewhere. And so one of the things that I would do is work with the other members of Congress to cap childcare costs, just like we do for military families, and to ensure that it's more affordable. Because investing in our kids and our families when they're young has such great outcomes later in life, and it's really the prudent thing to do. The other thing that I would do is make sure that childcare workers were paid a living wage. So right now, the average pay for a childcare worker in New Hampshire is like $16 an hour. So you can work full-time doing this important work of taking care of our kids, and you're going to end up with $30,000 a year. That's not enough money to live in New Hampshire. And so we also need to make sure that our child care workers and our centers are supported in doing the important work that they do.
A lot of young parents or parents of young children are going to hear this and say, yes, please, we need help, but how do you pay for it?
How do you pay for it? Well, actually, it's a cost-saving measure. So one of the things that you can do is tax wealthier people and encourage them to pay their fair share. But the money that you save by investing in kids actually pays dividends later on.
And then also single-payer health care. That's a not insignificant price tag as well. How do you pay for that one?
Yeah, so that's another thing that actually would save us money. Not only is it broadly popular with the majority of Americans supporting it at this system, when you talk to people who are invested in health policy and have spent their lives studying these questions, they say, actually, at this point, that's the least inexpensive thing that we could do would be to start with a system that enables everyone to get the health care that they need, right? That enables them to fill their prescriptions and get that preventive care and not over-rely on our ERs. And so actually that ends up saving us money in the long run.
Is it going to work though? Because obviously Obamacare now a couple of decades almost along, and it feels like that one didn't necessarily make it better for everybody.
Yeah, and so I would encourage us to look at something like Medicare, for example, which is a government-run healthcare system that's been in place for almost 60 years and does an excellent job of providing care to the elderly people in our lives. I would love to and see that include things like eye care and dental care, but I would point to Medicare as a great example.
Last week, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a ban on the prescription of puberty blockers and other hormone treatments for minors. There was a state law in that upheld that out of Tennessee. There's obviously for the purposes of a gender transition. What are your thoughts on that court decision?
Yeah, so I think that like the trans issue is one that has been used to divide us for a long time now, and I think that it's really frustrating to see the rights of trans people be used as political fodder. I think that trans people deserve dignity and respect just like everyone else. And I also think that, you know, in a place like New Hampshire, we really need to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to live free.
You know, there are so many things as a society that we don't allow kids to do, even with parental consent. Why should they be allowed to use these medications to treat something that may not persist as a condition?
Whether or not people are allowed to use the medications, I don't think this is a place where the government should be involved in people's healthcare decisions, just like reproductive rights, right? I believe that women should have the decision over their bodies, and I believe that families should have that decision with their kids. You
mentioned education. Obviously, you're an educator, professor, lecturer. Clearly, there is a lot going on in Washington about this with the Trump administration taking on the Department of Education. If and when Democrats regain the majority, there's going to be an opportunity to sort of restart and reset. So what new ideas would you bring to the table in sort of federal education policy in Congress?
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting question. And I think that there's actually a lot of great education policies that we just need the federal government to fully fund. So in New Hampshire, for example, in local government, one of the things that I see is the fact that we have to keep raising our property taxes. And one of the reasons we have to do that is because the state government keeps cutting sources of revenue. And the price of educating our students keeps going up because we don't have a state that contributes equally. The other problem, though, is that the federal government doesn't contribute equally to our public school funding. So we have a federal government that has passed a law that says that we need to educate all of our students. And one of the things that they don't do is fully fund that mandate. So, for example, the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, requires all schools to provide a good education for students with disabilities. But the federal government is not paying for that mandate right now. And so it's falling disproportionately on school districts to pay the cost of educating their students who have disabilities. And so that's a place where I think the federal government should be much more proactive and fund the laws that they're passing.
On energy policy, the state legislature is very gung-ho these days about next generation nuclear, small scale nuclear. Who knows when that's going to be a possibility in the future? It could be several years. But is that something you could get behind? Say if they were like, hey, we want to expand the old Seabrook 2 site to include next generation nuclear. As a congresswoman, would you say, go for it?
I think that when we're talking about energy policy, we need to balance like short-term lowering the cost of people's energy costs and also like the long-term sustainability. So nuclear is clean energy, but also we have reports that like the Seabrook nuclear plant in terms of its infrastructure is falling apart and really needs to be given a lot more attention so that we can make sure that if we're doing that, we're doing it safely. But the other thing that I really want to point people to is the fact that in New Hampshire, so much of our energy comes from Canada. And as a result of Trump Trump's tariffs, the prices of energy in New Hampshire are just going to keep going up. And so when we need to talk about energy policy, we also need to talk about what's going on in the federal government right now and the ways in which the executive branch and their decisions are making things more expensive for people in the immediate time.
All right, last question for you. If I own an AR-15, are you going to be pursuing policies that encourage me to give it up, trade it in, and perhaps not buy a new one in the future?
If you owned a gun, I would encourage you to take a gun safety course, and I would also advocate for legislation that makes the age for buying a rifle the same as the age for buying a pistol. I think that's something we really need to focus on. Common sense gun legislation is something so many people agree on, and it's something that's within our range, and we can reach that goal.
All right, Carly Bariant, running for Congress in the 1st District. Thanks for joining us on Close Up. See you out there on the trail.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Okay, when we